Thank you and good morning. It's great to be here. Can I just ask who was here the last time the Chamber hosted this event with Pick and Janine? Awesome. Okay, right. So today, you're not going to hear from me those inspirational stories that come from those founders. What you're going to hear is me talking a little bit around how do we create success stories like that. And my theme of my talk is about wisdom and how can you achieve wisdom ahead of your years. It's a bit obtuse for some people, and I promise that I will try and not be profane. How I was going to stop being profane was my godmother Julie Wilding was going to come this morning, and I stayed with her last night. She's a Taupo resident for the last 30 years, and she said to me, yes, I'll pick you up from the airport. Yes, I'll come to your talk. What time is it? And I said, well, we've got to leave at 6:30. She said, I love you, but I'm not getting out of bed at that time. She did say to me, though, over a bottle of wine last night, that anyone in the audience who wants to volunteer for RDA, they had to close the RDA one day last week because they couldn't get volunteers. So if you know anyone that wants to volunteer for RDA, Riding for Disabled, really, really important. She's been involved with that since she came here. Second thing is, I love the branding. Awesome job. 17 years ago when I started at the Ice House as the first employee, I said International Centre for Entrepreneurship 100 times a day for 6 weeks. And International Centre for Entrepreneurship. And you try and say it like repetitively. And so we were really stupid because we then went and named ourselves the Ice House, and then people said, what the fuck is that? Sorry. Right. Okay, so Pick and Janine are truly inspirational people, but as many other people are in the room. And what I think about, this is a slide that I use on the final block of our Owner-Manager program that we run, and we just finished our 44th Owner-Manager program on the weekend. And what I ask the owners is, if you're an owner, at the end of a 5-month journey to improve yourself and improve your business, where should you sit? That rock's meant to signify a speeding train that is your business, and it's got momentum and it's going forward. And so I say to people, should you be where the people are? Who thinks? So the 3 options are in behind the rock, on top of the rock, or in front of the rock. So we'll go where the people are now. Put your hand up. Not many. You're a little bit more friendly than Invercargill. No hands go up in Invercargill. They all look back at you stoningly and say, this is a wanker from Auckland. What about on top of the rock? Anyone think it should be on top of the rock? And what about in behind pushing the rock? Right. Well, hopefully I'll remember at the end to come back to this, and we'll talk about that. So my kind of starting hypothesis, the great man from Gallagher Group, Sir William or Bill Gallagher, he is clearly a wise person. He looks wise. He's old. That doesn't mean all old people are wise, but you would assume he is wise, and these 2 kids can't be wise because they're like 22. Anyone know Chandra or Jamie? Anyone heard of Crimson Education? Yes? So Crimson Education is an education business that was started 4 years ago now that helps families helping families prepare their children for entering university from the age of 15 or 16. It's a mentoring business, a mentoring platform. It's online. They have 20,000 students that they've created in 4 years with 2,000 tutors. It turns over about $20 million, and it's worth about $350 million at the last round. They can't be wise, can they? They're 22. I remember when he pitched, he's like half the size of me, and he pitched in front of 500 people at our showcase, and he raised $3.25 million from people in the audience. I think some people are going, well, that's a young punk. He looks pretty clever. The people who put $100,000 into that business are up 90 times their money at this time. We don't think young people can be wise. We think old people can be wise. So let's just have a little journey around how that can play out. I think many of us believe that you've just got to tread the path. So all these comments for me are about, because I do believe the more wise we are as an owner, the more effective we'll be as an owner and as a leader. So one theory is just get into life and do it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Kiwi business. I'm going to talk and some questions. Maurice Dinan is here. Put your hand up, Maurice, who works with me at the Ice House and looks after the Taupō region. She is wearing a t-shirt. What are you? Tenacious Tui. I'm a passionate penguin. We did this persona survey for us as individuals and as entrepreneurs around the types of people that we represent in terms of our character. And I am truly a passionate penguin, a smiling sort of snapper person, very friendly, but if you get me in the corner, I'm a little bit aggressive. My board found that out yesterday, and that wasn't so good because I was awake all night worrying about what I said to my board members. Anyway, about the Ice House, we talked at the beginning. What we do is, yes, we invest in startup companies out of Auckland. The second thing we do is run learning and development programs and coaching for established SMEs and business owners like yourselves. Mostly in Auckland, a little bit in Christchurch, and then we do some regional workshops as well. This is a perfect example of the sort of thing we do on course and down the bottom as well. One thing I just wanted to let you know is that there are a number of scholarships that we offer, which is normally about 25% or 20% of the cost of the program. We do that in partnership with key stakeholders like the BNZ, who offers scholarships to their customers and prospects, but also my chairman is a guy called Chris Quinn. He's been on the board of the Ice House for 10 years, coming up shortly, and he's CEO of Foodstuffs in the North Island. And we said to him, to celebrate your 10 years of commitment and volunteering to the Ice House and small business in New Zealand, what do you want to do? And he said, I'd like to offer a scholarship. So there is a scholarship which will close at the end of November for any owner that wants to go on one of our programs next year. And there's information on the site if you just Google Chris Quinn Scholarship or talk to Maurice at the end. Right, I went to Facebook because that's what old people who just turned 50 do. They don't go to Instagram because that would be weird, so my daughters tell me. I'm not even allowed to follow them. But I asked Facebook, what does wisdom mean to them? And there's some interesting stuff up there. This one, use of a question. This must be a corporate person that said this. This is very clever. What is it that they know that if I knew it, I would think differently? I had to think about that a lot. Lots of stuff here around mistakes, failing, learning from the journey, fig jam. It's interesting. Another person said, wisdom and learning can be sped up by surrounding yourself with a great bunch of other entrepreneurs. There's something about us as adults, and maybe teenagers, that we learn more from who we are alike and peers than we learn from others. So I can't teach my daughters anything, but I feed their friends. That enables me to get what I need to get done from my daughters, and then have to pay the friends later. But that doesn't matter. Entrepreneurs are way more open to each other. Founders are way more open to each other if the founder or the owner allows others to get inside their head. There is a sweet spot between arrogant and humble. And the other comment up there about we're not one thing, but it's interesting. Taken too far, you can be uncertain. Taken too far the other way, you can be, it's just too much. Maybe in the media we see a bit of that extreme these days. Right. A bit of context. So I said earlier on that we work with startups and we work with SMEs, and it's quite interesting for us the difference. And many of us who started their business here, right? Anyone started more than 10 years ago? Yep. So what we observe is if you talk to a startup entrepreneur and ask them to describe their business, they describe it in what they are going to do into the future. They don't describe it in what it is now. The corollary of that is an owner of an established business more talks about what their business is, what they do. And it's an interesting thing. Doing something in the future appears to be more exciting, it's more ambiguous, it's in the future, and the biggest challenge of a startup entrepreneur is translating their vision for what they're actually going to do today. So we spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs or founders going, right, love that vision, that's great, go there, but what are you going to do today to get a customer that proves you can get one step closer to the vision? The difference with an owner of an established business is they spend too much time in today, and their horizons are flat, and it's kind of boring. And so what we try and do with owners is say, reach out, aim for something in the future that creates something exciting, because it's amazing what your staff will say. Once you've got something that you're aiming for, the staff will go, wow, I want to be a part of that business. So owners of established businesses, I think, need to dream more. Founders of startups need to become more real. If you think about it from our point of view, when you've got highly successful businesses like a Janine or a Pick or Jamie or Chandra, the question that we always face is, how do we actually help them? Sometimes it's running behind them, picking up all their crap. Sometimes it's thinking, wow, I wonder how I can tell him or her the way other people think of them. How do I enable them to learn around how they need to improve? Startups, it's a bit easier, because startups have to take people's feedback if they want their money. But established businesses don't have to do that. They can just go, whatever, I'm all good, I'm fine. So what we have learned also is that there's two types of wisdom. There is pattern matching wisdom that comes from being around in life and seeing lots of things, and that's awesome, and that's needed to be a good mentor and advisor. But there's also domain wisdom. And domain wisdom says, and I met with a couple of brilliant farming entrepreneurs yesterday in Auckland who are taking kind of heritage-based lamb products and exporting it to Singapore. And they've got great mentors and supporters from corporate New Zealand, but they don't have exporting advisors who've also been able to get stuff off farm into processing and offshore. And I said, it's great you've got all that pattern matching experience that will hopefully keep you, away from, falling over, but who has been there before and done this thing that can advise you on the steps that you need to make? That domain wisdom is so very, very important. And my founder of the Ice House, a guy called David Irving, what I love about his journey, and he was a Waddies guy from Hawke's Bay, is that he worked out after about 20 years that actually startups was not his thing. He didn't have the domain expertise, for example, in biotech, so he just said, I'm not going to advise biotech startups because I don't know as much about that. Both life wisdom and domain wisdom are really important. And again, we think a lot around how can we get people to realise they need both of these things. Now, I loved Katie's comments this morning as well around the diversity and openness. I love when you go on the Tapo Chamber website and you look at the board and the first 4 people you see are females. Xero has done some work and they have about 750,000 customers in New Zealand. These factors are an increase of profitability for businesses in New Zealand that have advisors, leverage tech tools, and have a stronger, diverse approach to how they do business. Now, many of us would go, well, that's just obvious. Actually, the data proves, and when I look back at all these factors, I go, wow, that's interesting. The more open you are, the more likely you are to make more money. Right. So I was awake at 2:30 this morning, trying to think, the first thing I got on my phone was a data usage warning. We just moved to Vodafone. We love Vodafone, and my ops manager gets pretty shitty with people who, watch videos in the middle of the night. So I was like, right, I can't do that. So I was like, I think I can find the wireless code from my godmother's house. So I was awake in the middle of the night because I had a tough board meeting yesterday. Some of us sleep through the night. Some of us don't. In the early days of the Ice House, I had the saying that only the paranoid survive. I quite like that, although even to this day I think about only the paranoid survive. What it would be like to work for a paranoid person who's always on edge, who's always thinking that people are out to eat them, kill them, knock them over, actually not so good. That's a bit mean. That guy's dead now too. So he was the founder of Intel. That's not that funny. Right. Fancy term that I learnt from an 18-year-old. Anyone know what an asymptote is? Yes? Someone shook at the back. What is it? Yeah, close. But you should get a. I've got a present for you at the end. I'll make sure that Joe gets it. I've got a book, which is an awesome book. The reason why I say that is he's maybe 20 years on average older than the last 20 people have known what that is around New Zealand. Normally it's a white, pasty 18-year-old kid who puts their hand up and like, where did you come from? And they say, the asymptote. So interestingly, the asymptote is the never-reaching curve, or an invisible asymptote is linked to that comment around wisdom before, which is if I knew about a factor that would prevent my growth from accelerating, I could address it. This quote came from asymptote from a guy called Eugene, who was the first analyst at Amazon. And Amazon's invisible asymptote, they worked out, which would prevent their growth, was charging shipping fees. And if you think about it, if you're ordering razor blades, and they cost $8, not $28 in a supermarket, $8, well then you should probably charge them shipping fees because you'll be losing money on it. But Amazon worked out if they just took away shipping fees, they would keep growing and keep growing and keep growing, and the total business would enable them to be profitable and proceed. If they had charged shipping fees, they would have slowed their growth rate down. And so, health warning on the next slide is, I don't know why I've got that there, but what I think about invisible asymptotes in the context of our business is I go, what is it that if we knew about, we could take action which might enable us to continue to grow? Couple of slides. Technology. People see technology as a risk or an opportunity. I see it as an opportunity. Many people are worried about it. In New Zealand right now, there is $50 billion of KiwiSaver money in the market. And many of us are investors in KiwiSaver. Over the next 12 years, 150 billion more KiwiSaver money is going to come into New Zealand. Why is that relevant? Well, 150 billion into KiwiSaver, about 70 billion of that will stay in the New Zealand market. And the question, there's only so many water plants, stadiums, light rail, and large companies where that KiwiSaver money is going to go. And for us as business owners, the thing I'd get you to think about is over the next 15 years, I think, like the farming industry, there is a potential where you may actually see this wall of capital coming into the owner-manager market. Why is that relevant? Because you may see multi-regional ownership being created, across New Zealand, because New Zealand is like Australia was in the 80s. A wall of money is going to come and look for a place to go. And as a small business owner, you could sit there and go, I'm 5, 10 million, I'm all good. But you may find that creates a serious opportunity or risk for your business. If the rate of change is greater outside your business than it is inside, the end is nigh. Another quote from Jack Welch. You can look at this, he was a GE guy, and go, oh, it's not relevant to me. Technology's not relevant to me. Capital, that won't touch Taupo, I'll be fine. That may be true, and it may not be true as well. And I don't say all these things because I want to scare people or make them depressed early on a Tuesday morning. But I say these because we're always thinking, how do we get people to just think, what if this happened? Funnily enough, across New Zealand, I don't know whether I've got this in slides, we do this thing with the BNZ where we run a game changer, which is kind of like a simulation game, which helps owners think about decisions they make in daily life. And we've got a risk question in that game changer. I'm amazed how over the last 3 years, business owners are way more attuned to having insurance and risk and natural disasters. I think there's been a massive shift in business owners going, actually, this business continuity is really, really important, which is a good thing. Many of us spot trends, see trends and go, wow, that's happening. But very few do something with it. So I love the people who go, that's a trend, and I'm going to go and do something. Cecilia Robinson, who founded My Food Bag, just saw it in Sweden, said we should do that in New Zealand. You know, Janine and James from Faro spotted a trend, a market opportunity, and did something with it. Many of us, 100 times people would just say, oh yeah, we should do that. Talk about it as, over a beer or a wine. I love the people who go and actually do something with it. I think the other thing I get to do, and I don't know whether this is first person or third person, but many people who want to change the world neglect to think that they actually have to change themselves first. Right, couple of things. There's this great book, if you've ever got family members or friends starting a business, there's this book called 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel. It's a great gift for those of you who are more well-heeled, $28 rather than the $100,000. Think about that, $28 to your child, and then get them to read it and come back to you with their thoughts on doing a startup versus the $100,000 that you lend to them that you never get back. And in that book, Peter Thiel talks about countries, organisations, and people. And, you know, one of the things I loved about this is that I am indefinitely optimistic as a person. Okay? I wake up every morning, it's a good day, have a coffee, and then I go, right, what am I going to do? I don't have a plan. Maurice, don't listen. I don't have a plan. I said everyone on the team must have a plan, but I don't. And then every now and then I get out of control, and I'm like, shit, I better get a plan. But I know me, that works for me. Other people are definitively pessimistic. And that's actually okay too. Or they're definitively optimistic. But it's for us to all work out the types of people we are, because that enables that, you know, the difference in conversation and openness. I should have worn my penguin t-shirt. I didn't. But, you know, when we wear these t-shirts out and about, it's always interesting for staff members and for owners to see the difference between a tui, a kia, a kiwi, and a penguin. And you can instantly go, oh, you're that, which is a good way. And that's actually, if you want to do the persona quiz, there's the link. It's free. It takes 5 minutes. It's pretty simple. And if you're really cheeky, I don't know whether we've got any t-shirts at the moment, but if you're really cheeky and talk to Maurice, she may find you a t-shirt in the future. Right, I've got a couple other things around wisdom. One of the things we noticed from the owner-manager program is that few of us conduct leadership surveys around what our staff think of us. You know, in the Ice House, we do that the whole time. In the BNZ, I guarantee you they do it the whole time. But in small business and owner-managed businesses, often we don't. Does anyone do those culture surveys that ask the team, what do you really think of me? Yep. Is that kept confidential from the owner? Or do you actually look at it and go, right, we'll get rid of that one? No, I'm just being facetious. It is amazing if you're open enough to ask for feedback, is one thing. The second thing is if they're brave enough to tell you what they really think. You know, and that second bit is a really, really big challenge. You know, because I think it's a shock when you actually get the truth. Because most owners and most people, I don't think they actually realise. I know there'll be exceptions. Right. The mind is a powerful thing. And this is amazing. You know, an 18-year-old and a 19-year-old, co-founders of a business called Crimson Education, didn't think, they weren't doing it to build a valuable business. They were doing it for shits and giggles. They were just like, hey, I'm at uni, this is cool. It's quite hard to get into Harvard. Why don't I just do this, because it'll be good on my CV so I can get a job when I finish uni. That was it. And they put a pitch together and said, let's just see if we'll get some money. And they got $3.25 million. And then they're like, wow, that's pretty interesting. All of a sudden people started saying, their families started paying them 25 grand to help their children get into Harvard, Stanford, Auckland University, Otago University. And now they've got 20,000. But when they started, they were just like, let's just have fun. And then all of a sudden they went, wow, we could actually build a massive, massive business. I said it was $350 million. I could see that business being $2, $3, $4 billion business. There is no doubt that we become wiser over time. So you could just be relaxed and just travel the path. I'm impatient for New Zealand business to become wiser. And so what I think about is, how do you accelerate that capture? Well, wisdom happens when you have a flood and you've got to deal with it, or an earthquake. It also happens when you're forced to go through experience. You know, as much as it pains me, often startup entrepreneurs that we help raise money from property investors. Now, there's nothing wrong with property investors. They're beautiful people like all of us. But most property investors know shit about investing in a technology company. And all of a sudden you've got a wealthy person who thinks they know everything talking to a founder of a tech business who thinks the wealthy person knows everything, and then 6 months later realizes, well, that dude knows, or dudette knows way less than me about this. Why did I ever take the money from them? Because I couldn't get it from anyone else. But they're forced to go, right, how am I going to deal with this? I think some entrepreneurs and owners are incredibly open. Actually, funnily enough, maybe not funnily enough, 3 times, in my experience, 3 times more female owners are open than male owners. I don't know what that says about society. Or they become empathetic through life experience. I think my final thing I leave you with is, I don't think there's a choice about, you two chatting, am I too short? I'm so concerned about getting my 9 o'clock flight that I've cut you short. Are we going to ad lib? Yeah, so, the final thing I do think about is, how can you either speed up your own wisdom capture and or help others? Because, the impenetrable force that is my 12-year-old is like many business owners who are closed. My 14-year-old, easy. She knows what she wants to do. She's like, Dad, let's get up and go run. Let's go to hockey training, easy. 12-year-olds, fingers up like this, and I'm like, do you want to go? No. Do you want to go? No. Would you like to do this? No. Why don't we do nothing? You're just being mean to me. Now, with some business owners, the challenge is the ones that are conscious and know that they want to improve themselves, they're easy. It's the ones that go, right, actually I know the answer, just give me the money. Or the ones that go, I'm fine, and you know that they're not fine, that you go, right. You can't tell them. You have to enable them to have that learning. And sometimes it's forced. Sometimes it's advisors or mentors. So I think that's about me. Oh, I love this lady, Janine, and those of you who are in the room, you know, she came on the Icehouse Owner Manager program because her husband said, go do it. Go do it. She was a mum of 4. I don't know whether she said this to you, but she was a mum of 4. She was the face of the business. She felt guilty being a mum, and she felt guilty being an owner because she was kind of in both places. And in the end, she said, bugger that. I'm going to be a full-time mum, and I'm going to run this business, and I'm going to be happy in both places, and I'm going to look after myself. She created that goal, created that picture. Ironically, I don't know where she talked, but you know, the CEO that runs their business for them now met on the owner-manager program. He left his business and is now running hers. And she just, once she pictured the goal, stuff started to happen fast.
Good morning, Taupo. I'll try that again. Good morning, Taupo. Do you know, I just realised something when I walked up, that my book matches my shoes. And it's also the same colour as Donald Trump. That wasn't planned. I don't have fancy slides, it's just me. But you know, when people often start their talks and they're talking about how they're going to give you takeaways, and you sit there and go, oh, you're joking, right? That, you know, when I think of takeaways, you think about soggy fish and chips. You don't actually think about, you know, insights and all this kind of stuff. So I couldn't think of a better word though. But basically I'm going to make 5 points, and they're pretty much takeaways. So apologies for the analogies around fish and chips. But I thought I would start by getting us kind of in the frame of mind. Who can remember their first overseas trip where they took the photos to the chemist, had to wait 2 weeks to work out whether or not that shot of the Eiffel Tower worked? Who can remember that, eh? And just going, oh my gosh, and having to hand over a big wad of cash, right? And there's that in-between bit where you're trying to go, oh my gosh, did I actually cut the head off somebody? And, you know, and you usually did. Who can remember taping your favourite songs off the radio, eh? And then you had to spend all this time trying to work out not to get the speakers, you know, the introduction out, and you'd spend hours and hours making these tapes of songs you're trying to capture. Who can also remember having to be forced to watch endless slideshows of, you know, like your neighbours' holidays, and everyone is kind of, everything's brown, eh? Everyone's in those kind of weird shorts too that were really too short. Yeah, that's a different story as well. And then who can remember talking on the phone that was attached to a wall? I know that sounds weird, but it did happen, didn't it? I tried to tell my kids that. Our phones were attached to the wall and they just fell about laughing. Okay, so what have all these things and all these experiences that we've shared got in common? They're completely obsolete, aren't they? So if we think about music streaming, we think about all these activities around photo albums, CDs, DVDs, cassette tapes, dot matrix printers, typewriters, home milk delivery. Who can remember dial-up modems? Oh, aren't we pleased they're gone? I was going to say, who can remember a spiral perm? It's not quite the same, but it goes the same as a dial-up modem. So when you think about it, over the last decade, how much change in our individual lives we've lived through, haven't we? We probably haven't even necessarily noticed it. Because we've grabbed these bits of technology. Who wants to use a map again? Do you know, a big map? Who can ever fold it back the way it ever came out? When the GPS lady can growl at you if you're going the wrong way. I mean, who doesn't want that experience all the time? So if we think about this, a lot of this technology we've just grabbed, and we've just kind of assimilated it into our lives, and we've made it part of what we do, and probably haven't really noticed, because actually, guess what? It's generally made our lives so much easier. But if you stop and think, for some of us, say if your absolute dream was to run a music store, or you were the guy that was developing the photos in the chemist shop, or you actually want to be a travel agent. I mean, you really, really, really don't use travel agents anymore. Imagine all those people's lives that wasn't just fun technology that made our lives better. It completely changed the whole course of your life. The jobs just didn't exist anymore. So the first point I'll make, first takeaway, is that when we think about it, we've all lived through immense periods of technological change, but haven't necessarily thought about it in that way, if that makes sense. So for some of us, our lives have just got easier, and a whole lot of things, we don't want to go back to the whole lot of that technology. But for some of us, that technology change has already created massive disruptions in our lives. But what if we think about the change that's happened as kind of old school change? Like, we've had change, but what if it really is just old-fashioned change? So we look back, and bear with me on this 2-second history lesson on all the past industrial revolutions. So we had this first industrial revolution around the beginning of the 19th century, and water and steam, somebody worked out, could drive engines, right? And so we got a huge amount of leaps forward because we suddenly had power to move things around. So it was change, but it was change on a fairly linear way. Like, one bit of things happened that drove a whole series of different changes. The second industrial revolution was seen at the beginning of the 20th century, and that's when we got kind of electric power. We could turn things on and make things go as well. And again, that's where that was mostly used was in assembly lines, and we were able to make products faster and better. So that kind of drove a lot of change. But again, arguably, it was only on a fairly small scale. And in they call the third industrial revolution was sort of the 1970s, and this is where our kind of we start to kick in. When we start to get computing, we start to get personal computers, and we start to be able to have computing that can add things up and do things faster for us. But they're all talking now about the fourth industrial revolution. Who said about that? Who's got it on their CV? Oh, I lived in the fourth industrial revolution. I think we should all put it there. And what the sort of commentators are thinking about is that there isn't one moving piece. Pretty much everything is moving, if that makes sense. So this industrial revolution is being driven by changes in computing power. So who's heard of Moore's law? Does anyone want to give me, how would you describe Moore's law to the crew here? Yeah, absolutely. So our computing power is kind of exponentially growing, and the cost is going down. So that's the reason why we can have cell phones that can do pretty much everything we need them to do at the moment. And what that basically is driving is that all the things we are actually interested in, so you think about all the bits of your life or all the bits of your industry or all the bits of your business that are driven by computing power, and think about that computing power is only going to exponentially increase. So it's not like one bit of technology that's changing, it's the underpinning fabric of pretty much a lot of the things that we do is increasing exponentially. So that gives us a potentially huge change coming in exponential curves, Can't see anything, can't see anything, can't see anything, wham. So if that's happening, just think about what may happen over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years on all the little bits of pieces that we use that are being driven by computing power if everything follows that law. So, and we're starting to see some really interesting changes in things like nanotechnology. Imagine 3D printing. You want something, you just print it straight away. You don't have to order it, it's just there. Imagine all the changes we're getting in AI and machine learning and biotech, robotics and genetics, right across the whole entire field. And all these will drive our abilities to change our manufacturing and engineering processes and drive our ability to use data in ways we probably even can't imagine now, which is fascinating. So Saudi Arabia has just granted Sophia a robot citizenship last year. Isn't it amazing? There is a citizen of the world that is a robot. And the last, Mizuki, appears to be an 18-year-old girl in Leeds, and she's just won the most lifelike chatbot 3 times in a row. She talks about food and pop music, and it cracks jokes. And she's completely an AI machine. It's quite amazing, isn't it, where technology is heading. And Deloitte just did a worldwide survey and found that 41% of businesses had significant AI investment. Imagine for all those businesses that aren't starting to think about AI, what's it's going to mean in the future. So it's quite amazing changes happening. So here's the kind of second takeaway. Think about exponential change, but think about exponential change on so many different fronts that we don't quite know how they're going to converge. So how is an advance in one area going to knock on to another area that could drive complete change that we hadn't thought of? So facing really huge opportunity for change and evolution, but it's exponential and we don't quite know how it's all going to play out. And that's kind of what we're facing over the next few years. And that's all good to talk about because it quite often feels like Silicon Valley. You know, that's what happens over there in, you know, startups and tech garages and all this kind of stuff. But what does it actually mean for us? But say the small businessman, small business person in Taupo, your average Kiwi worker. So when we look onto that, what does it mean? What does it mean for our ability to have a summer barbecue with our mates if we want to, you know, save a bit of money and skip over to the islands for a holiday to get out of that horrible winter and hope that taking the cat to the vet doesn't cost too much? That's the reality of our lives. But what does this all mean for that? Well, the predictions and the research are a wee bit mixed. So we have a whole lot of commentators that predict that, you know, that there's going to be mass social hysteria, and then some predict there's going to be mass renaissance, where we're not going to have to do anything, the robots are going to do it. None of us would take that view, but everybody who's written and thought about it are not predicting the status quo, and they're also not predicting a fancier current state. Does that make sense? We're not just going to have more apps, or our life is, it's not a linear, nicer, easier now. Everybody is predicting quite different changes in the way we think about things and use technology, and they're probably thinking in the next 5 to 10 years. And so this is where we get into a bit of the analysis and prediction. So looking at current state of automation, like where current ability to automate is, and doing an analysis across the New Zealand labour market, NZIR found that 9% of jobs could be removed today. Straight automation, straight easy to do if the businesses chose to do it. They also predict, looking linearly at where the sort of automation is heading, and end up with a figure in about 5 years of 30% of jobs potentially being able to be automated if the businesses chose to do it. So that's kind of what people are thinking about in terms of business change, business process change, and what it might mean for your employers as well. Now, if you take that 35%, that's 370 Kiwi battlers, 370 people who just want to pay their mortgage, go on holiday, and look after their cats. So what does it actually mean? The interesting thing is, what kind of jobs are we talking about? And we often think about, we go straight in our heads to go, well, it's warehouses, isn't it? It's, you know, we've seen that. It's labourers, it's kind of those manual jobs. But actually, where the most automation, or where the most technology is looking at automation, is probably in our more white-collar administration jobs. The kind of mantra is, if you can describe a bit of your job, like actually say what you do, and describe the process, then it can be automated. And a lot of the gains and a lot of the research and the science has been looking around, some of us have seen, around things like the legal profession and the medical profession, and some of those. So it's much more the white-collar jobs as well. So change isn't just going to be low-skilled, automative work, it's potentially across the whole labour market. There will also be a piece that is actually quite exciting, where actually the boring bits of our jobs could just be removed. And so a lot of jobs, a lot of the stuff we do is repetitive, so that could all be systematised and automated. But if you start to do the figures, so say a third of my job could be automated, you only need a third less of me. Or maybe I need to be doing something else. So if you start thinking about it though, you start thinking about, what are we all actually going to be doing in the future? The current survey from the Institute of Directors showed that 58% of directors on New Zealand companies expect tech disruption in their industry within their term, and that term is 3 to 5 years. So the people that are sitting in those boardrooms are expecting this to disrupt their businesses. Again, what does this actually mean for the local business owner? It means we have to be on our toes, because the disruption might become quick. A new technology somewhere could be shared, and a new way of doing things could happen quite quickly to all of us, quite quickly. And what does it mean for the average Kiwi worker? The same thing. It means we can't pretend that we've got a job for life. And if we have that mentality, like a lot of our parents or our grandparents did, I am a such and such, so I will be a such and such for the next 20 or 30 years, it's probably very much the wrong mindset to be having. And we also often have that, what we call the 3-stage process. We're going to do some education, we're going to do some work, and then we're going to retire. But continually we're finding that we need to challenge that. Yep, we might do some education, we might do some work, but we might be doing some more education. We might be having a period out of the labour market, and then having another one, and we might actually not really retire, we might just wind down. So that kind of model of our patterns of our lives that we all expect, I'm going to retire when I'm 65, probably isn't for any of us in that room actually quite the reality that we think it is. And it may also be, if you think your business is the one you're going to sell to pay for your retirement, what happens if, 2 or 3 years before you're ready to retire, it's been disrupted? So it's lots of things to be thinking about as we move forward. So for some of us, it also means that we don't necessarily have to have a job. We might not actually have one business. I gig work, which is a trendy name. I've also been called a slashy. I thought that sounded pretty Halloween-like, but the whole idea of that you're a director / NGO leader / consultant / that concept that maybe it isn't one job or one business that we're looking at. Maybe we put together a portfolio and a way of managing our risk. And then continually we find that more and more New Zealanders are taking that option. We're up to about 30% of us working in this way as a labour force, which is a massive increase even over the last 2 or 3 years. It also means, it does mean goodbye to routine and manual jobs. It means the skills we're probably going to be looking for are far more about problem solving and analytics. So if you've got a business, or if you've got skills that are around solving somebody else's problem, you're probably going to be more valuable in the future economy than just running a process that actually somebody might be able to do faster and easier through automation. It also means there's probably going to be less value on technical knowledge. If you know something really deeply, does it matter as much today as it did 10 years ago? With the Google, with the ability to connect, with the ability to tap into networks, is the fact that you know something as valuable as it was. And what we're finding is that actually it isn't. It's what you do with that information. It's how you process, how you problem solve, how you apply that information that matters, not that you know stuff. The ability to access information has never been higher, and it's never actually we're not going back. We're always going to be able to have this access. The interesting thing I've been asking myself too is, what does this mean for our kids? What do I tell my 12-year-old who, like Andy, totally puts her finger up to me and goes, I want to be anything as long as it isn't like you, Mum, which is, yeah, good on her. There has been an awful lot of research into this, and I would point to, if any of you have got kids, it's called the Foundation for Young Australians. And they did an amazing piece of research where they analysed all the graduate and entry-level jobs over the last 5 years in the Australian market and said, what are employers looking for if our kids are going to get jobs? And what they found over that period was there was a 200% increase in a demand for digital skills, so that's not surprising. Employers want digitally literate kids. But there was a 150% increase in ability to critical think and communicate. So even our youngest entry, if you're going to get a job, and if you're an entry-level job, you've got to be able to solve problems and tell people what you think, which are actually quite high-level skills. They also found that they predict that our 15-year-old today will have 17 jobs over 5 different industries. They'll spend upwards of 30% more time learning on the job, because they're going to have to, and like we all have to, every time the technology changes, we've got to get up to speed. So we can assume that will be happening continuously for our children. They're going to spend much more time problem solving, critical thinking, and probably having to use science and math skills, because most of the jobs are going to have some sort of basis. Even if you think about all the traditional jobs about caring for people, they're going to have a whole lot more of an analytical and data-based components to them that everybody's going to have to be on top of. And interestingly, there's also a prediction that organisations will become flatter. There's not so much of a need for a manager if you can see what all your workers are doing because you've got the digital tools in front of you. So that means if you're going to be a successful worker in the future, we're going to have to be self-directed. We're not going to have somebody telling us what to do, because as a business owner, you're going to be able to see what everybody is doing, because your systems will be so transparent about where your workers are doing, what they're doing, how they're doing, and what the impact is. You don't need managers then as much. So that's a really interesting piece too for our young people. So they talk about 21st century skills, and they aren't about knowing stuff. They're about the ability to work together, to communicate, to understand, to empathise, find insights and build solutions. So the kind of things we used to do at school, which was memorising things and regurgitating them, isn't the skill sets that we need to go forward, nor for our kids going forward as well. All this means, however, we might be leaving some people behind, If we haven't got all these high-level skills, what does it actually mean? And I guess this is something I've been thinking about as well. And we probably have to have some tough conversations in the future, because technology isn't neutral. We often think about it, but you know what? There isn't a 767 full of robots coming and being held up at customs. It's not going to work like that. We're all going to make choices about where we apply technology and where we don't. So we're going to make choices about who has jobs and who doesn't, and what things are automated. And we might have to have a bit of a tough conversation about that. So my next takeaway would be, over the next 5 to sort of 10 years, your customers, your staff, your colleagues, you and your families and friends are all potentially facing, quite massive change. And what does that mean for your ability to support them, and our community to support them, and indeed our country to support them as well? And as I said, we can wait for it to happen, or we can absolutely, utterly and totally get in behind it and make this work for all of us. But right at the moment, we're probably all in doom and gloom at the moment, but don't worry, there is some hope. Having worked through all this research, I was really keen to know what's the way forward, particularly for us as individuals. And so I was lucky enough to go and talk to 12 prominent New Zealanders, you'll know most of them, who are right at the cutting edge. So they're living right at the edge of automation or community development. They can see everything that's happening. And so we asked them not what do you think is going to happen. We weren't so much interested in that. We thought, given everything you know, how are you personally preparing yourself for the next 10 years? How are you going to pay your mortgage in 10 years? You know everything, you can see everything, you're at the cutting edge. And what we basically did was write a book about it that, as I said, matches my shoes. Don't worry about the robots, because it was really trying to tap into that knowledge to go, how are all these people who get it going to make themselves relevant for their future careers? And what they told us was, again, it's not necessarily rocket science, but what they told us was the first thing that all of them had in common was that they had a really good understanding of themselves. And I know that sounds all a bit airy-fairy, but they really understood what they wanted for themselves and for their family, and what they wanted in their work, and what they really were excited about, and what they didn't want to do. So they kind of understood they'd spent a lot of time thinking about actually what they wanted for them and their family. I know that sounds simple, but I wonder how many of us actually take the time out to do that. Particularly, when we're busy and just trying to get, dinner on and the kids to soccer. Have we actually really thought about what we want to do over the next 10 years? These smart people had done it because they could see what change was coming. They were also, and I think this is the most important thing, they were also immensely curious about what was happening around them. So even if they weren't in an area, say, of AI, they were actually trying to work out what was happening. And the reason they were doing that is they wanted to know what potentially could disrupt them, or what were people learning, or what was happening around them. So they were continually asking questions and putting themselves in situations where they actually understood really what was happening right across the various things. They put themselves into networks like this one, where they were engaging with people who were in different industries, and said, well, what's that going to mean for what I'm doing? What's happening internationally as well? And based on all this, they actually had a plan. Now, some of them, their plan involved knowing what they were going to do over the next 2 or 3 weeks. For some of them, one woman, Michelle Dickinson, she had an idea that she was throwing a stone in front of her, and she was going to step on that stone. So that was her way of planning. Where am I going to put my next stone? Another woman, Frances Valentine, had a 10-year detailed plan about how it was going to work. That kind of made me feel a bit tired. But all of them had an approach to thinking forward. Whether it was on 2-week cycles going, I want to go over here, but I'm going to keep on thinking about what I'm doing over the next 2 weeks, or that idea of incremental planning, or the grand plan. But all of them had a plan for the next 10 years. And then the last thing we would say is all of them looked after themselves. And I know that sounds really trite as well, but how many people in this room get enough sleep? Not many hands. And how many people exercise regularly? Just simple things. Oh, you're awesome. Must be Taupo based, eh? You guys are. But so many people don't put looking after themselves in their business or life plan. But if you think about, disruption can happen and change can happen, and you might have to move and adapt. You can't do that if you're tired, unfit, and not particularly well. So they invested in themselves and their own mental well-being, so that they were constantly bringing their A game, so that if they could see an opportunity, they were in a really good position to take it. And again, that doesn't really all seem like rocket science, does it? But that's how these pretty amazing people were preparing themselves. I think this is the next takeaway, that none of these successful people were waiting for the change to happen to them. They weren't sitting there waiting for a robot to take their job. They were going to tell the robot what to do, or they were going to create the robot or bring the robot into their own business. And so they were actively trying to understand their environment, planning and being particularly proactive. They'd totally taken responsibility for their future. And I think that was the key theme through all the very successful people that we interviewed. So in the last few months since the book's launched, I've been really lucky to talk to a lot of Kiwis about these issues. And there's been three reactions. So people really embracing it, going, yeah, I need to think about this and what this means for me. Another reaction which says, that's all bullshit. It's just, it's never going to happen. We've always had change, it doesn't really matter. Or the third reaction has been just straight fear, because it's quite frightening. Potentially there's stuff happening that we're not in control of, that we just don't understand. So I think they're kind of three natural reactions, and it'll be interesting to see where you fit within there. We haven't done the research here, but an American study last year asked Americans about tech change and jobs. And about 80% were worried deeply and prepared to admit it, that they were worried about technology and how it was going to impact on their job and their future well-being. So I thought that was quite interesting. 60% also wanted really strong limits on technology displacing jobs, like they wanted rules around it about what could happen. Interestingly, I thought as well, about 90% were really okay with robots doing the really disgusting, dirty jobs. So we're kind of okay with them on our own terms, right? So I thought that was a really interesting insight too. So I think many of us are afraid, many of your customers will be afraid, many of your potential business partners will be starting to be thinking about sort of an underlying fear, but the time is now not to be. It's the time to eyeball this future and really go for it. So what we are going to need, I think, in the next wee while is leaders, business leaders particularly, who can create the bridge from the technology that is sitting out there to customers and to other businesses. And we're going to need brave people, not necessarily brave people, but people to take the opportunities. There's so many opportunities sitting there. If we think about it in terms of a fear, we're just not going to embrace as much as we want to. So you are going to have to help your people, your staff, your family, potentially your customers through a huge amount of change. You might want to change how you deliver your service. That's going to maybe take a lot of persuading and all these kind of things, but I do think you've got a really important leadership role here as well. We're going to need a bit of courage, and we're going to need leaders who are actively shaping the future. But what I've seen of you here, and what I've seen of the pretty amazing, I want to get the name right now, Taupo Business Chamber, is that you're well placed to do that. You're having these conversations, you're eyeballing them, and you're going for it. So I think you are immensely well placed to do that. So I think Taupo is going to be in the driving seat of the future. Go for it. It can all happen here. You can have robots or you can not have robots, but have them on your own terms and do it your way. So that would be my last message for you. Your last takeaway is don't wait for them don't wait for the robots to get you.